Good morning, everyone. Welcome and good morning to a very wasashiburi na episode. I haven't done an OTJtv episode for a few months, and I am more than honored, more than pleased to actually have as my guest Dr. Diane Nagatomo. Diane, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to be here.
No, it's very nice for me to have you here. I don't remember the last time I got such a great response from the audience to come and join an episode, but that just speaks to your reputation and the I already used the word reputation. I need a thesaurus. What's another word for reputation? What people know about you and people want to come in and listen to you. You've been in Japan or you've been teaching in Japan for 38 years.
Yes.
And
I came in 79, so it's been 44 years since I arrived.
Holy cow.
And actually the first time I came was 50 years ago exactly, when I was in high school.
Do you think that first visit was what inspired you to come a little bit later?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I came to Japan before Japan was cool, and my friends are like, Japan? And I'm like, oh, Japan is really a cool place. So
well, that would have made it mid 70s then, early 70s.
Yeah, 73. So I was 16, and I just kind of had the luck to come here and stay with a Japanese family that the girl went to my high school. And yeah, it was a real life-altering experience. So when I went back to the States, I always wanted to come back to Japan. And like probably everybody that's been in Japan for a long time, I thought I'd come back for a year, learn perfect Japanese, go home, become an elementary school teacher. And that was a long time ago. It didn't happen that way.
It's interesting that I was reviewing the information that you gave me before this episode, and it turns out that you're one of because you're an editor with Melody Cook. You're one of the editors for the series of books on life and education in Japan.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's basically the topic of today's talk is your life and how you see education in Japan. You were a teacher for all that time. So as soon as you got here, you were teaching.
Well, pretty much. I mean, I got off the airplane and checked the Japan Times, and got hired like the next day in various eikaiwa schools. And I I was at a Bonodori Matsuri in front of my station way back in 79. And I met this American guy who was there standing in front of Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he told me that his school, he worked at a school, and he said, oh, I think they're hiring people. So I said, oh, okay, I call them up. And I got a job at a place called Chiyoda Business College, which was a senmon gakko. And I started working there. And from there, I met a Japanese professor who introduced me then to Tamagawa University. And that was where I got my foot in the door of university teaching. So it all started at Kentucky Fried Chicken at a festival in front of my station where I met this random American guy, because those were the days that if you saw another foreigner on the street, you stopped and talked to them.
Yeah. Or my friend would he said one of the hardest sort of habits that he had to break was to constantly, this is way back in 91 when I first came, was to sort of nod to a foreigner as soon as he saw them, and he kept doing that. But it's not unfortunate, but like the interesting thing was he was actually Chinese Canadian. So to the foreigner coming the other way, it looked like these, and I'm walking with him, these two Japanese guys are like going, yeah, hey dude, hey, what's up? They're going, what are those Japanese guys doing? Sort of giving me a what's up. So many questions I want to ask you, so many places that we could begin. I almost, sometimes when I have an episode like this where I have such an interesting guest, I almost wish that I had rehearsed more or prepared more to actually ask you things so I don't sound like a rambling idiot. But there are, I think the running theme that I'll probably have in terms of questions is just the idea, well, that's what it was like then, but what is it like now? Or how do you see things in retrospect? And one of the first things, or one of the questions that were on the PR card that we wrote was the idea of how you got started, or how one does get started from moving into, let's say, K-12 education into university teaching. Did you find that difficult, or was that always something as a goal, or did you sort of stumble across a connection that way too?
Oh, I just stumbled across that connection, I think. I started teaching part-time at university after my first child was born. So it was 1984. And the person that brought me into Tamagawa University was a person, he was kind of a famous character back in the day because he had a radio program for Hyakuman Nin no Eigo. So he was like the celebrity teacher at Chiyoda Business College where I got started. He'd come like once a week and give lectures. And he was also running something called English Galaxies, which he would, gather a bunch of people together with some foreign teachers, and we would go away for 5 days and have this, language event. So through him, then he brought me into Tamagawa University when my son was 1 year old. But I had known him for a couple of years before that. So that was really my first step in the door. I mean, and I really didn't know anything about university teaching or anything like that, but I had been teaching at Chiyoda Business College for a year. So I kind of knew what it was like to stand up in front of students and so on, but I didn't know the university thing. And then I worked part-time for 4 years, and then I got pregnant with my daughter, and I took a year off of maternity leave. And in the middle of my maternity leave, they called me up and asked me to come back with tenure. And I had a BA at the time. So this is not applicable for other for anything related today. But while I was on my maternity leave, I did start my MA. So by the time I think I was in the first year of tenure, I did get my MA.
Was that something?
They didn't require it.
Oh, I was just about to ask that. Was that something that they requested of you? Is like, well, no. We're looking to give you tenure, but could you at least get an MA? That wasn't even a request.
Yeah, but I mean, it was all supply and demand, and they knew I wasn't crazy, which I think is because actually, when I was hired as a part-time teacher, my guy, his name was Tommy Uematsu, and he's still alive. He's in his 90s now. He told me that I would work for a couple years and then be full-time. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't really know what that meant or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And then he was so apologetic after the first or second year. And he said, I'm really sorry, but the university decided to hire a man instead because they thought he'd be more reliable. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I was thinking I wanted to have another baby anyway. And I didn't really know what tenure was because I was kind of ignorant back then. And that really reliable guy that they hired never came back after summer vacation. He went to England and took his bonus, and he never came back. So then they hired me after that.
Did you ever even meet this uber reliable guy?
No, I never met him. No.
Okay, so you don't know if he was really that reliable or not. Well, that's good. I'm glad they got what they wanted. Yeah. Eventually by giving you the position. Yeah, I guess at the time it was still a thing where you thought, where you think, I don't want any of this pregnancy business, and who needs that? I take it then that you wouldn't want to sort of offer that as advice to up and coming university instructors, though. Oh, basically you just need a connection. What would you tell them now? You can expect. Maybe you heard these stories about these kind of hiring episodes in the early 90s, but really this is what it's like now. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say now it's all about qualifications. It used to be who you know. If you knew somebody powerful in the department that was more powerful than another person and they liked you. But now it's all because it's supply and demand. There's so many people who are looking for jobs and who are here in Japan. And so I would say the advice is get your degrees, get your publications. And if you live in a place where there's not as much competition, there might be more leeway in finding a job. I know I've heard of people who live in the countryside somewhere and they get some teaching jobs at a small type of tertiary institution. And then once they do that, they have their foot in the door. You can move, laterally to other positions in other universities. But yeah, get the qualifications, do the publications.
What role does a connection, does an inside man, inside woman have to play at all? If not at all, you would say anymore?
Well, I would say that if they know you and they know you're not crazy, that really helps a lot, because it's very difficult to deal with people that you don't, that may be unreliable or unstable. So, you know, I mean, and that kind of follows the line of, you know, you put down references, and and a person might call your reference to find out what type of, you know, if you are, you know, who you say you are. And I think, you know, it's along the same kind of lines, but I don't think just the connection now is enough.
Yeah. I came along around, well, quite a bit after you already were teaching full-time, tenured, but it was the very early 90s, 91, 92 in Japan, but only started teaching university about 96, 97. And at the time, when I was hired to work at university, I was encouraged by my friends telling, no, there's this work available, go ahead and try and get it. And I thought, yeah, but I don't even have a master's degree. That just isn't possible, because I was still thinking the same way that we do in North America, thinking that no, you're not going to get it if all you have is a baccalaureate. And I was surprised that I even got it. But now, yeah, I would have to agree with you. The publications, especially, even if you're still partway through your master's degree and you get your master's degree, you might end up losing out to someone who's already published. And you don't have to be, you don't have to have an advanced degree to publish. You know, if you go and make a few friends in the university sort of teaching field and start publishing, I think a lot of people sort of forget that that's something you have to have in hand at the same time. And I encourage people who really do have this as a long-term goal to get your publications first. But I was surprised too when I got a job with just a BA, but that just won't work anymore now, not even here in Fukuoka, you know. Although there are still people being hired full-time in Fukuoka without a PhD.
Well, I have a friend who didn't get an MA, but she got the what is it, the CELTA certificate.
Right. Okay, there you go.
And then with that, she got hired teaching in a nursing college, which was kind of near where she lived, in a place where a lot of people wouldn't want to commute to. And with that foot in the door, then she got hired in some other universities with that. And she did have some materials that she'd published. So sometimes all it is, you know, for appearance sake, if a place really needs to have someone who's reliable to come and teach some basic English classes. But for the most part, I would say, yeah, you need more than that.
At the time, I mean, you already told the story about how you were basically moved aside in favor of, you know, someone of the other gender. Is that still the case now? Do women still have to pay particular attention to that and be careful or wary of anything in terms of getting their job?
I don't think so. I think now, you know, some universities are putting out there that female candidates will be considered over other candidates. I've seen that. In fact, just recently, somebody, a guy was talking to me where I'm teaching part-time, and he was asking me if I thought it'd be worthwhile for him to apply for this job, which had specifically stated that female candidates would be preferred. And I said, go ahead and apply for it, because just because they say that doesn't mean that whoever applies is actually going to be qualified enough. And so if all things are considered, I think they will take a female candidate now, because of, you know, they want to improve the gender imbalance. Whereas before, and not that long ago, universities would hire the male applicant with the kind of attitude that, well, he's got a family to support. So,
Yeah.
And that's no longer the case. And I've heard, you know, some men are very disgruntled by this, and in a way I can't blame them. But at the same time, when the shoe was on the other foot, they were benefiting in that direction.
Yeah. I see. Interesting. We're talking about this now. The last couple of days, the Supreme Court in America overturned, what's it? Affirmative action in university entrance enrollment, and I look at these things and I look at some of the arguments on both sides, and I'm surprised just how little people sort of understand the role of history and what was in the past and why that's important now. And they still keep going, no, that's basically reverse racism. And I'm going, no, wait, no, you don't understand what went on in the past. Now, and on the other hand, like once we get to a point where like, yeah, that's not necessary, that shouldn't be necessary, and it should stop being done, because it's a kind of sexism, or in this case, a hiring. But it isn't not necessary yet. I don't know. I don't want to make you step into a minefield, but would you agree?
Well, I think, if things were pretty much equal, it wouldn't be necessary. I think the issue in the States, with the affirmative action, I think that's different, because that's not only involving race, but also class and money, background, and privilege. Whereas, here, I don't know how much. I think we're all pretty privileged in Japan to begin with, if we're here with MAs and doing research and publications and things like that.
That's quite true. When you came to Japan, you weren't immediately in university teaching. You spent time in, I think you mentioned you spent time in, actually, why don't you review it? My memory is so bad these days. When you first came, where'd you start?
Okay, well, I came to Japan because I stalked my boyfriend all the way to Japan, who's my husband now.
You don't have any arrest warrants out on you that I need to talk to the police about?
No.
Okay, good.
I just said, okay, you're going back to Japan, I'm coming too. And I started working, teaching English, but then I thought I wanted to study Japanese, so I quit Shioda Business College, and I went to Japanese school for, I think, a year or two. And then I didn't have any place to practice Japanese, because everybody wanted to practice English.
Sure, of course.
So I got a job for 6 months as a Ginza bar hostess.
All right.
That's something people don't know about me.
Yeah, there's something men won't be able to really qualify for, but yeah, go on. Yeah.
Because I thought it'd be a good place to speak Japanese.
Yes.
And that was actually, an interesting and kind of fun experience. And so I did that for about 6 months, and that was about all I could take, because it did get boring after a while. And then I, continued to Japanese, and then I had a baby. So, yeah.
So to what degree can you compare your university teaching experience with the other venues of English teaching in Japan, like English language schools, or somewhere along K-12? What did you experience there? Or did you like spot in for friends once in a while when you were already in university?
I never taught at a high school or a secondary school. I did work a little bit in close contact with a high school in Chiba as a kind of advisor for one of their grant that they had. So, I would sometimes go to the high school and observe classes and attend meetings there, but I've never taught students. And as far as, like an eikaiwa school, I did work for a school, but it wasn't like the eikaiwa schools that sprouted up later on. They had a few lessons in their office, but they basically sent you out to companies and other places. So I don't think it applies to now. And when I came, I came on a tourist visa, because I was a stalker. And the conversation school that I got hired for, like the day after I arrived in Japan, they also were teaching some Japanese lessons. So through that, I was able to get a cultural visa. I had to go to Korea.
Good.
And change my visa over to a cultural visa. So I had a cultural visa for maybe a year. Then I got married, and then that ended that problem.
Just quickly, one more question before the real question I wanted to ask you. Back in the mid 80s, when you came to actually work or stalk, when you came as an adult, was there the sort of environment of like Ekimai Ryugakusei and all of these English language schools all over the place that were just popping up everywhere, like they were in the early 90s. Was it that way back then as well too?
No, it was because there weren't that many foreigners in Japan at the time. And so there were some schools. I think the most reliable school at that time, and it's still around, is Kanda Gaigo Gakuin. And that was a place that had, language classes and, and hired teachers. In fact, I had my best friend come to Japan for a couple of years, and she got a job working there. So there really wasn't that much. I think after the JET program started, and then, eikaiwa schools started sprouting up in other remote areas, and but they didn't really exist before because I don't think there were enough foreigners in Japan to attract students to any of them.
Interesting. Okay, so let's get to the question that I wanted to ask you. Is you have a unique perspective in the sense that you watched all of this grow, all of this change from your perspective as a university instructor. What did you see going from the mid 80s? And specifically when you mentioned that, you have this idea about the competing ideologies of eigo versus eikaiwa. What do you see that made you sort of frame it in that sense?
Well, it wasn't because of the eikaiwa schools exactly, but I think it's when they started teaching English in the secondary schools with the JET program. And when they started the JET program, and they brought in a lot of foreigners, the JET program wasn't started by the Ministry of Education. It was started by the Ministry of Finance as a way
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was to fix the trade imbalance that was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had a lot of difficulty convincing the teachers and the teacher union to accept foreign teachers into the schools because they thought that the teachers' jobs would be in jeopardy. So they ensured that the ALTs would just be an assistant, and that something kind of extra, a bit benefit for the students, but the real business of learning was still going to be at the hands of the Japanese teachers, who would be irreplaceable, and carry on with the Juken eigo type. So when in my research, or when I refer to eikaiwa and eigo, it's not so much eikaiwa conversation, but kind of an image of the different types of learning and teaching that is in each one. Eigo is, instructed. It's basically translation, preparing for entrance exams, learning rules, lots of explanations about grammar. And eikaiwa is always like something fun to do when there's nothing better going on. So when I was teaching at Ochanomizu University, which is a very high level school, many of the freshman students told me that they never had a conversation class ever. Even in their, the speaking class was always still very much Juken, test focused, because the goal was to get into college. It wasn't until they came into university that they had classes of speaking and communication and so on. So thinking that these are two separate types of language is not helping anybody, because eikaiwa is just fun and games when you have nothing else to do, and eigo is studying, rules of grammar. No one's going to learn anything in these. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I would say like my Ojidai students, they succeeded in spite of the system. But when you look at other people who've been learning for 6, 8, 10 years and still they don't know the be verb conjugation even, something is failing there.
Yep. Before so many things I want to ask, but before we do, I just want to tell the audience in the room, if you were here looking for the live stream in OTJ, I very much apologize. I don't know why I'm not able to live stream this. I will look into that before the next episode of OTJ, make sure that it works then, if I can get it to work. However, thank you for coming. And if you want to bring up a question, make a comment, please feel free to put that into the chat. I normally say that to people also over in the live stream to put that into the comments thread, but no need to do that this time around because there is no comments thread. There is only the chat. So bring that in there. Or if you just want to write a reminder to yourself to ask that question later on. Otherwise, I will try to bring the questions that you do have in the chat to Diana as soon as we can. You kind of had a little bit of disdain in your voice when it came to grammar translation, and even to the whole idea about eikaiwa, air quotes, eikaiwa, as being something that didn't really lead or didn't really amount to much for either way of teaching English. And did you see any significant sort of, I don't want to say a melding of the two situations or improvement in the situation? If you did, what do you think led to it, or how is it being utilized now? Are we making any progress that way?
Oh, I think, you know, the JET program turned out to be amazing. And when I look back at the level, the ability of students in the past 30 years of how it changed, yes, I think there's been a huge change. And I think that so many people are proficient in English. The pronunciation by even low-level learners is so much better than it used to be because they're not learning katakana English anymore. So when I was talking about eikaiwa, I don't have anything against eikaiwa or eikaiwa schools or, you know, students learning, you know, going and learning how to communicate separately because they, you know, they feel they have to because they're not getting that in the public schools or the, you know, the formal educational institute. So I don't mean to have any kind of disdain for people in the eikaiwa industry. And as you know, we have a wonderful book on Candlin and Mynard that is focused on eikaiwa because there's very little research.
Where is it? I bet you don't have it at your desk.
Somewhere over there. But yeah, so I don't mean to have the disdain, but I don't want to even disdain like translation, except constantly talking about language or thinking that, you know, a reading class is you translate back into Japanese. That's not reading. And, you know, a writing class where they translate, that's not a writing class. That is something else. And these days, as you know, we don't really need that many translators because the translation industry is dead unless you're maybe a literary translator. And then you've got to have superb language skills. Yep.
We'll get onto that topic a little bit later about what happened to us after computers landed on everybody's desks. But in terms of just going back to the whole thing about grammar translation. So, just one comment I wanted to make. I don't have any disdain for it either. I think everyone's kind of locked into this paradigm. The teachers will tell you, yeah, but I don't really have a choice because, you know, that's what Kocho sensei wants me to teach and what Kyoto sensei wants me to teach. And then the principals and the vice principals say, well, guess what the Board of Education wants us to do? And then they'll say, well, go talk to the ministry. We were all locked into this paradigm. Students know this, parents know this, and the teachers know this. And it's just this inertia to try to get out of things. So I don't want to make it sound like anyone's trying to be evil. If anything, everyone's trying to get out of it, but what do you do when these directives come up from the top?
Yeah.
In university, though, do you still, because, you know, I think a lot of students, when they go from K-12 or from senior high school and they go into university and then they encounter maybe the first few foreigners that they can actually speak to, especially early on in your years, that was the thing that maybe they were looking forward to. But these days, is that something that is being addressed properly or being addressed well, do you think? Do you think that we've come a long way enough?
I don't know. I mean, you know, way back in the day, you know, I mean, for some students, like you'd be the first foreigner they ever laid eyes on in their life. So that was like, you know, like a trip to the zoo for them. I don't think that's, you know, I mean, with the JET program and with eikaiwa schools all over Japan, I mean, there are non-Japanese people, they have infiltrated the country thoroughly. So it's not such an exotic thing. And I don't think students feel that, wow, it's such a treat to have a foreigner as a teacher or something so exotic. I think that they just look at it now as another kind of class.
what do you see as issues in current education, language, English education in Japan? What do you think are, if we have come away, maybe a good way, what are the hurdles, what are the hills that are still in front of us that we have to move beyond?
Well, I think, and if, nobody asked my opinion on this, but I
I
think
am.
well, I mean, nobody important. Um,
That's true.
in terms of policy, but I think they should do away with the English tests at university and high schools, because the purpose of the test is basically to figure out who can go in and who stays out, but it's not really a measurement of English skills. So if they go with something like TEEP or another way of measuring the test, then the teachers will start teaching for that particular test rather than the tests that are created by Japanese professors for universities. And Japanese professors usually have backgrounds in linguistics or literature, and they don't really know anything about test making and reliability and validity and things like that. Whereas like the center exam, which is now called the common test, I think that test is more reliable in determining a person's English ability. But the purpose of the exams is just to get a cutoff in competitive schools. And then there are the schools that are not so competitive. So anyone who applies for the school is accepted. But then what is the purpose of that test? It'd be much more practical to teach English as a language that is spoken by and used by millions of people. And so, they do need to know how to read and how to write. And, they may not have to write academic papers in their life, but people will want to, be able to follow a web page or, speak to a taxi driver or something like that. But a lot of people aren't even getting these basic skills because the bar was set so high with, some really obscure grammatical point that even, native speakers don't care about. And, a couple years ago, I wrote all the dialogues for NHK's radio program for junior high school students. And I realized, in this project that every grammatical point a person really needs in their life, you learn as a second grade junior high school student. If you master all those, you could probably communicate with anybody at a basic level.
I think it's even lower than that. If you probably learned almost all of the general grammar. Okay, if you're talking about grammar, most of the grammar that you learned before you got to junior high school is the stuff that you're going to need through most of your life, in my opinion. What changes though is vocabulary and your ability to actually adapt those grammatical points to difficult communication situations. Actually, you've inspired so many ideas in my mind. However, other people are talking about us down in the chat, and I will put them out to everyone. Ruthie Ida, hi Ruthie, mentions that from the eikaiwa perspective, these days, my colleagues all teach grammar from the upper elementary level, but the best schools are able to teach grammar in a quite communicative way. Chiyuki Yanase, good morning, Chiyuki. Most of my students who got solid foundation of English as a language at unis I work at want to do eikaiwa as kids, but it depends on the school, of course. And Ruthie comments to you, Diana. You wrote the NHK Junior High Radio Dialogues. That's so cool. One of my students listens regularly and loves them. Did that have anything to do with the stuff that was for Japanese learners? Do you think that was actually taken to take the NHK Radio Dialogues and move them into the NHK Dialogues that was for people studying Japanese? Because I use those to study Japanese.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would have been cool. I'm actually speaking to my Japanese. If you were, that I'm sort of indirectly speaking to my Japanese teacher back from the early 90s. I think too, it's not so much that the bar was set at a really high level with grammar points. I think it was just a bad sort of symptom of the fact that we needed a lot of tests, and it is much easier to mark X or O, on Batsu or Maru on a test when you can see a grammatical point that was the word order was wrong or the spelling was wrong, the marking is easier.
Yeah.
And you need that if you're not actually an instructor who can actually speak the language. And
Exactly.
I'm sure you saw much more of this back earlier in the days when you were here, that most of the instructors in English couldn't actually speak the language.
Yeah. I mean, after, during the war years, English was abolished from most of the curriculum, was abolished from the curriculum for all female students. It was limited in the junior high for male students. English departments closed at the university level because, English was the language of the enemy, right? But then immediately after the war, English became a required subject, and for everybody in junior high, and suddenly they needed thousands and thousands of English teachers. So they had an army of teachers who had never studied English themselves. And so they had to kind of come up with a program quickly that would be teachable. And the whole purpose was used for basically determining who goes in and who goes out of secondary and tertiary schools.
Dan, you're a very big name within JALT, and you've been involved in a lot of JALT events and a lot of JALT things. And one of the things that I think you're, at least up until recently, was the idea of gender issues and gender awareness. How do you see that in your perspective through all of these decades in university education, progress or maybe even regression in Japan in terms of gender issues?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when I was doing my doctoral research, and I was researching actually how beginning teachers develop a sense, Japanese teachers develop a sense of professional identity, because they usually have a background in literature or linguistics, and then suddenly they have to teach English language. So I was kind of looking at that, but in my interviews, I noticed what came up were specific gendered issues that the women were talking about. And because of that, then I became more and more interested in the gendered aspects of language education. For example, my students were steered into being English majors by their parents because the parents felt it was more appropriate for their daughters than the other language or the other things they were going to do. One wanted to study math, but then she realized that she would have to compete against male students for a job. And whereas English would be easier. So, there was lots of, we're talking like 70s and 80s, so it was a long time ago. One participant wanted to major in Japanese literature, and her father said, but if you major in English, you can make money later when you're a housewife and teach English to the neighborhood children. And she said, oh, okay. So that was, but then she became an English professor at a university at one point. So it was probably good advice.
Sure. Sure.
But so, seeing those things, then I became interested in gender. And, I spent 27 years working at a women's university, which is also the oldest university in Japan, women's university in Japan. And they, deal a lot with gender, but they have a gender research institute. So I think I was just kind of interested, because of my experiences there.
Within the publishing industry, as you were writing, was that, I imagine that was also probably very male dominated and something that was a bit of a slog for you, or am I assuming too much?
I've never, other than the Tamagawa University saying they wanted to hire a guy because he'd be more reliable. Personally, I have never had any negative experiences with anyone. My biggest mentors in Japan were two Japanese male professors. In the publishing industry, I never had any problems. So I can't say, and I've always worked with good male colleagues. So I've never worked in a place that was like filled with contract workers who are competing against each other for other positions, though. And I think, that might be a different situation for women. But so from my personal experience, I could say I never had any negative experiences.
That's interesting.
Not in JALT, but I've never been an officer in JALT, other than the Gale coordinator a few years back. So, and I've, only met really nice teachers. So maybe I'm really lucky.
That's a blessed life.
I like everybody I know. So
yeah. Oh, wow. That is a blessed life. Listen, it's 9:45, and I want to give other people an opportunity to actually join into this conversation. I'm sure a lot of people came here specifically because they thought wow, this is someone I've always seen on stage or whose name is on a book, and now I actually get a chance to speak to her. So for those of you in the audience, feel free to open up your cameras. Before you open up your microphones, though, I would ask that you raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom window, so that then I know who's kind of in what order to ask what. I think one really nice tradition that Japan has for outgoing tenured professors, full-time instructors, is they give them a chance to give their final lecture. And you gave yours, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. How was it? Or were you nervous, or did you think, oh, what am I going to talk about? I've only got an hour, and what did you hit?
Yeah, I did it on the eigo versus eikaiwa ideology.
Oh, okay.
It was at the end of the pandemic. So I was more fortunate than my colleague the previous year who did it completely online. Mine was in person with my colleagues, but any attendees had to attend online. So it was kind of disappointing in a way, because I would have liked to have seen former students, and I would have liked to have had a party and, all that kind of cool stuff we used to do for retiring professors. So it was a bit of a letdown, but, it was better than it was the year before in 2021. I gave my final lecture in 2022.
Hang on. I just noticed that apparently someone mentioned that you might not be able to start your video. I think everyone should be able to start their video, but let me just check specifically that person. That would be a little bit yeah. What year was it that you gave your final lecture?
2022, so just last year. Last March.
And did you I don't know how these things go. I've never been able to attend one. So it was like a really big ceremony. And you gave it in English, I would imagine, not Japanese?
I gave it in English. And my colleagues that I've barely seen for 2 years because of the pandemic attended. Two of my doctoral students attended. Everyone else was came online. So it was the pandemic. Whereas, I think 25 years ago, they had it like at a big hall, and, hundreds of students came and things like that. I think it did water down significantly over the years.
Before we go on to the next topic, is anything else that you wanted to mention over all your long perspective of teaching?
No, I think, thank you for giving me a chance to ramble on about myself.
You were not rambling on. It was fascinating. I'm sorry if I feel a little bit out of sorts. I actually feel a little bit of rust, not having done an OTJ episode the last little while. However, I want to talk about your writing.
I just realized that I should have turned a light on. It's probably a bit dark.
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, it was a little bit dark. I thought maybe you
because it's so dark outside with all the rain.
Yeah, the last time I talked to you was a really bright light on you. There's a window right in front of you, right?
What?
There's a window
right in front of me. So I've just turned on the
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, okay.
What was the very first book you ever wrote?
The first book I wrote was called Conversation Topics for Japanese University Students, and it was published in, I think, 93, and for Kinseido. And I used to do a lot of voice narration in the 80s and 90s, because again, there weren't that many people in Japan doing that. And I narrated it for a textbook, and I thought, I wonder if I could do that. So I went home and I typed up on my word processor a chapter, and I mailed it to the guy who was in charge of the book that I was narrating for, because I had his business card. And he called me up on the telephone, the landline, and said, "Oh yeah, why don't you write the rest of the book?" I'm like, okay. So yeah.
Did you find, again, another one of these things where okay, so how was it? That's how it was then. How is it now? Publishing has changed a lot, or the ease for women to become writers has changed a lot. I know that one thing that when I first started talking more to people through OTJ was the Candlin and Mynard probably made it a little easier for female authors to actually get published in the academic field. I don't know if that's you would agree with that.
I don't I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, Candlin and Mynard is making it easy for a lot of people to get published in the academic field because it's a kind of small publisher. The books aren't that expensive. There's a quicker turnaround between, proposal and acceptance and production. So I don't know if I can say that that is a gendered thing, although it probably is. But yeah, I mean, I never experienced that myself. And my two academic books that I published was with Multilingual Matters in England, and I don't think there was any gender issues there. It's just I came up with a good proposal, I guess.
I'm sure you did. Not only Fiona Wall Minami would like to ask this question, I want to too. What made you go into fiction writing? Was that just something that I read too many academic tomes? I want to do something imaginative.
Well, I've always loved reading, and I've always been a big fiction reader. And when I was debating to do a PhD, I kind of thought, I don't know if I want to do that. That's going to interfere with my reading, because I really liked reading novels and and fun things. So I think I just liked reading, and then I thought, okay, maybe I will give it a go. And after I submitted the manuscript for my 2016 book, I started going to Tokyo Writers Workshop, and I brought some really dreadful drafts of chapters and things like that because I really didn't know what I was doing. But people gave good feedback and were nice, and I've been going pretty much ever since. Well, up until the pandemic. So I owe a lot of gratitude to the Tokyo Writers Workshop people. I couldn't have done it without them.
Butterfly Café is your most recent book. Is this your first fiction piece?
This is the first published fiction piece, yeah.
So how long have you actually been
novels before that, kind of as a practice?
So when did you start doing that?
This probably maybe 4 years ago. But during the pandemic, the first part of the pandemic, I tried to sell it and I sent it out to agents and got rejections. And then, the first part of the pandemic, I didn't do much because, overwhelmed by all this online teaching and sitting in front of the computer. So my free time, I was not doing that. And then last summer, I thought, okay, I need to revise this again and give it one more shot. And then I found an indie publisher. So they took a chance on me, and it's coming out next Friday.
Just as a quick mental note, when you say, oh, it was about 4 years ago, 4 years ago sounds like a long time. And then it's suddenly, because I'm thinking about these things, it reminds me that that's basically 2019, which is still approximately the start of the pandemic. We've been at this for about 3.5 years now. This is
so I think I maybe 2018, I guess. I think I was working on it for maybe a year or 2 years before the pandemic, and then I had a finished version, but kept getting rejected. So every rejection, then I revised it, and then I did get one rejection, but with very, very good feedback, and that feedback I think was really useful. And I sent it back to the publisher, but they never responded after that. But I think, because of their feedback, the book is actually published by a different publisher now.
Why do you think the first publisher didn't respond? They went out of business?
I don't know, or the editor moved on to something else, or, I think that editors and agents are overwhelmed by inquiries.
Yeah. From my experience working with Dorothy Zemak, having a good partner in an editor is a really important part of the process. How did you find it different from academic writing? Your brain shift or your perspective on the words on the paper or the process that was in your mind?
Well, when I asked a friend of mine who's a professional editor to read my manuscript, she's like, Dan, you don't put any contractions in your novel. I'm like, oh, that must be my academic, voice coming.
Oh yeah.
So I
You
went
sound
back.
like Data.
Yeah. so, so I went through and like, adding contractions here and there, and in a way you have to be bilingual with your writing styles.
Is that the way you approach it? Like it's
Well,
basically another
I'm thinking
language
about
teacher?
that more now, but I don't think I'm going to write any more academic stuff. I think I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And then, I just finished yesterday the manuscript for a writing book, Simply Writing,
Yes.
which is published by King Sato, and it was originally published in 2001. And they asked me to make a new edition. So I've been working on this for the past, 6 months or so, to update it for the 2024 publication. And that also then, is completely different because you have to really make the language level appropriate for quite basic beginners.
Just going to Simply Writing for a little bit, the 2001 version versus the 122 years later, what do you have any interesting stories about stuff you had to pluck out or stuff you had to put in? You're going, oh my God, I wrote that. And
yeah, I had to take out things like, let's go to the video shop and borrow some videos to watch tonight,
Blockbuster.
Yeah, or how to get traveler's checks from the bank. So this time, I thought, wow, this book has been, in use for 20 years. And if the next edition is used for another 20 years, I'll be almost 90 when they might want another revised version. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to make every dialogue one that won't get outdated quickly. So like I'm using a textbook by a different, writer, and they're talking about the Hunger Games, which was really, huge movie back in the day, but none of my students know that movie now because they were all in elementary school when that came out.
Holy cow, that's true, eh?
Yeah, so I revised, I tried to make the conversation something that hopefully won't go out of date so quickly.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about that. In a way, you have to sort of have to prognosticate what won't go out of date or what might be potentially relevant even 20 years later. And what did you choose, or what did you tell yourself, no, that's not going to be relevant in 20 years, or I shouldn't talk about that for kids who are still children right now? Was there any particular topic where you thought, okay, I got to put that in because that's really going to work and that's really going to be relevant 30, 20 years from now?
Well, I think, like how to email a professor, that may get less important, but the students don't know things like levels of politeness or, difference of, in contacting people in English. So that might go out of date, like sending an email, but I think still they need to be aware of, you speak to your friends in a different way than you would speak to a prospective employer. So things like that, I guess.
I think sometimes students might get the mistaken impression that one of the big differences between English and Japanese is that we all speak so directly and so with great equanimity to each other, and we don't have levels of politeness. And I'm going, say what? Where'd you get that idea?
Yeah, that's a big misunderstanding, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Last call to anyone who actually wanted to ask their question directly to Diane. Before we do something which I think probably really raised the population of people in the room more so than usual, is the idea that, oh, Seth, would you like to ask a question?
Good morning, Diane.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for your time today. How to address a senior professor. In any case, my question would be, in terms of your experience with writing styles professionally, which do you find most challenging and most pleasurable, shall we say?
Okay. I think the fiction writing is most fun and most challenging because unlike, academic book, you have to put in some plots and you have to have a love interest. and you have to have a little bit of sex in it, and you just don't have that, directly anyway, in the other things. So I think thinking like foreshadowing and thinking, adding something here because 5 chapters later it might make more sense. I never had to think about that kind of thing before, but it's more fun, and I like writing dialogue. But yeah, it's a learning process because I really feel like I learned a lot in writing this book, The Butterfly Café, that I think my next one's going to be better.
Thank you.
Yeah, hard to top another Diane Nagatomo book, but the only thing that would be another Diane Nagatomo book. Actually, tell us what, just without any spoilers or anything, what is the plot of The Butterfly Café?
Well, there's this American woman who lives in Japan, and she's married to a Japanese man. And then people say, "Oh, is it autobiographical?" And I'm like,
I was about to say.
He's really horrible and mentally abusive, which is not my husband at all.
Oh, okay.
He dies off in the first chapter.
Good.
I kill him off right away.
No.
And it's all about how she kind of gets her life back. She discovers that he had a lot of lies and secrets, that their entire marriage had been built on, secrets. And so she's uncovering one secret after another, and but she somehow inherits this cafe that's filled with cats, and she builds her life from there, and happily ever after.
I don't know if you're going to have any recollection of this, but I remember one of the books that was when I first came to Japan, or just before, in the early 90s, I think it was, that got a bit of airspace and column space in newspapers and TV shows in North America, was a book written, I think, by an American writer about his Japanese friend who was a housewife. And the title of it was called The Secret Life of Keiko. Do you have any recollection of that? And it kind of came out and made a bit of a splash. It wasn't huge or anything, didn't win any huge awards, but made a bit of a splash because it was about how back in the early 90s, everyone had this image of Japanese being very stoic and being very polite, almost to the point of being caricatures of themselves, parodies of themselves. And it turns out that this woman had this very secret life where she was having liaisons, and she was keeping money from her husband, and she was doing things that she wasn't telling the family about because she wanted to live her own life the way that she wanted to. It kind of reminded, or I was reminded of that book, listening to your plot about that. That now makes me want to read your book even more. I already wanted to read it. One question that was brought out to me, Diane, is Chuki asked, did you find that your role as a wife and a mother, and I assume a grandmother, had any kind of a role in or an influence in your teaching, how you related to your grandchildren or children, gave you insights in dealing with maybe even your university students?
Probably. Probably, I think, this is maybe one gender difference that, women tend to deal more with the pastoral care of students. But I think pastoral care at the university where I was at for so long was very common because it was a very small school, and we only had 25 English majors. And if you were their Tunning teacher, you were in charge of, a lot of their emotional well-being. So I think, I probably paid more attention to students. But I don't.
Maybe not.
Well, it's kind of hard to remember. I mean, I think being a grandmother now of 6.
Oh, congratulations.
I don't know if that's influencing my teaching so much now, except I sometimes talk about my grandkids to the students. But were
there any interesting influences on your teaching? not just the obvious things like you came from a different culture or anything like that, but a particular writer or a particular pedagogical philosophy that you really like to sort of hold up in front of yourself, say this is the center of my teaching ideals?
Well, I don't know. I think I muddled through the first 10 years of teaching because, when I first started teaching, I had little kids. So I wasn't doing any research at that point until they were much older, other than finishing my MA. So I think I muddled through, but it wasn't until the late 90s that I read Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress. And I think that influenced my teaching. I started wanting to talk more about critical topics with the students. I realized that the students wanted more than just language learning, but also, interesting things to talk about. So I think, Bell Hooks influenced my teaching. And I think my students influenced my teaching, to be honest. They were really good and very ambitious. And you want to hear something really cool?
Of course I do.
One of my students that I've taught for many, many years is now supervising MA students from her tenured position. So, I think that, it's like, I gave birth to another person.
Sure. Basically, you were raising her.
Yeah. And she was my student as an undergraduate, a graduate, a doctoral student. And now she's tenured at Scuba University. And she's published a lot, including Jolt Journal. Yeah.
That must be cool thinking about her when you taught her as an undergrad, right?
Yeah. But she came to my office and said, "I want to be a professor someday." I'm like, okay.
There you go. And watching her English skill progression, I'm sure too, would have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I noticed that we're a little bit beyond 11 o'clock, and thank you very much for not only for coming to the episode to be our honored guest, but also for staying so long. But I think a few people might be thinking, geez, I don't know if I can stay much longer. And I know a lot of them actually wanted to come to get their mitts on your book. And we promised that we would actually have a little bit of a contest for that book. And so let me lay down the rules of the contest. Basically, this is a typing speed contest. So if you want to indulge yourself, if you want to involve yourself, open up the chat window to Zoom. So open up the chat window and get ready. And we're going to do a practice run just so then everyone says, well, wait, I didn't really know what we're doing. So open up the chat window and get ready to type, okay, a word in the chat window. And I'm going to give you the word and I'll show you how it works. The first person in this contest to actually get the top line with that word in it, and by the way, we're English teachers, so spelling counts, in there, will actually be the winner of this particular contest. So get ready, get your fingers on the keyboard, okay? Here comes the word. The word is caterpillar. Let's see who wins. Okay, who's the first one to write caterpillar? Oh, watch out. Oh, there you go. And it's Seth Wallace. Okay. All right. There you go. Okay. Ruthie, I'm going to ask you to provide the question that they must answer as a line of chat, and that will provide us with our first winner. Okay. So, Diane, go ahead.
I'm sorry. What am I supposed to do? Ask the question?
You ask the question. Yes.
Oh, okay. What insect is in the title of my book?
Ooh, who's gonna win? Who's gonna win?
Oh
no, sorry, Seth. You had a spelling mistake. I literally said, watch out for spelling mistakes. Oh dear. Let's see here. Is that a spelling mistake? No. Oh no, that's Catherine.
Catherine.
No, Seth did have a spelling mistake, so Catherine wins.
Catherine.
I warn people about spelling mistakes. Spelling counts in this class. Okay, so thank you, Seth. So listen, I'm going to leave it to Catherine and Diane. Are you guys friends on Facebook?
Yes, and I know I can find Catherine's address. We're both members of Foreign Wives Club. So okay, I have her address in my directory. And I've actually been to Catherine's house in Iwate.
There you go. Catherine, I don't know if you want to open up the camera on your computer right now, but you can actually, why don't you tell Diane, this is what I want as my inscription.
Oh, okay.
Muted. No, you're muted. Haven't said that in a while.
Oh Lord, I'm on my iPad, which is why I was like, can I even type? Because it's like, where's the time? Like, I just don't usually Zoom on the iPad. Like, where I all the
Excuses.
I felt like I felt like I was back in 2019.
That's right. That's my very first FNS.
It's like, but yeah, no, I'll message Diane later about.
Okay, you get an inscription, isn't that cool? It's like
I know. I feel so blessed.
Yeah,
I love Diane. Yeah, this has been a great talk. I was downstairs cooking earlier as I was listening along. But yeah, I think Jose, I always love to catch your TVs when I can. So
okay. Good. Thank you all very much, Diane. I don't know if you wanted to stay. If there's any particular topic you wanted to go on a little bit longer.
If people want to ask me something, I'm happy to stay.
Yeah, I've been telling people, like,
yeah,
what are the questions?
I'm so thankful that so many people came, and it's, that you gave me a chance to, ramble on, and it's just really nice to see people. And Adam, I'm so glad to see you here, and thank you for all your advice on technical matters. Your name is mentioned in my book in the acknowledgements.
Whoa, which book?
Butterfly Café.
Wow.
So, in the acknowledgements, because he gave me a lot of advice, which unfortunately I haven't taken up on yet because I don't know how to do it. But on
good
pages and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, so just one thing. I'm not the husband that bites it in the first chapter, am I?
No. You're still alive and kicking.
Good. Yeah, well, either that or we're watching a really, really good AI hologram right in front of us. Okay. Come on, you guys. There aren't any questions for Diane? I thought there'd be a bunch. I thought it was going to be an easy hour for me because everyone's going to be like drilling her with questions that they've been wanting to ask her all this time. Nobody wanted to ask anything?
Okay.
Okay.
I know. I mean, you kind of covered pretty much all the bases for me. I feel pretty satiated at the moment, except I'm gonna go on Amazon later and buy that book because
just unfortunately, the exchange rate has made it expensive as paperback. I can't do anything about it. I asked the publisher, please make it cheaper in Japan, but I don't think they can really control the difference in price from America and Japan. So that's kind of disappointing, but it is also a Kindle version.
Well, it'll be worth it, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it'll be worth it. I'm going to get my mitts on it. If no one minds, I would like to mention the upcoming episode that we will have on July 15th, around the same time, 10 a.m. Hopefully, I'll be able to fix whatever the problem was that didn't allow me to live stream. Or maybe because I've been moved to a different account through my university, this is actually a very different account, and maybe they removed that ability. I don't know, but I think this will also be a very good episode, one that's very timely, up and coming. The whole idea of what are we doing as teachers, or what are we going to do, or what should we know before we do anything with machine translation and artificial intelligence. And the three lovely people that will be coming on are not only experts in it, but also very, very good speakers. And I'm sure it'll be a very fun episode for their insightful opinions and their breadth of technical knowledge, depth and breadth of technical knowledge. So I hope you can join us 10 a.m. July 15th. Diane, just as a quick one, any thoughts on what, maybe luckily you don't have to face as an instructor anymore when it comes to technical advances in machine translation?
Well, I think, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not going to be teaching like 20 years from now. I think things are changing so quickly that it's going to be hard to keep up with it. But, I will be teaching for a few more years. So, yeah.
You are still teaching, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm teaching 9 classes at 3 different places. Are
you finding it hard to keep up with any presence of MT or AI in your classrooms? Kids who might, your quotation marks, cheating?
I suspect that a few students are using ChatGPT for some of their assignments, but they're quite high level students, so I can't really tell if they're cheating or if they are good. So to avoid that, I do have them write some things in class. And I do tell the students to use like Grammarly, because I don't want to, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. And I don't want to have to catch their small errors. I want to talk about, organization and things like that. So I've been telling them they have to submit their papers online as well as giving me a paper copy, because I can check if it's, done by ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I don't think that's quite true, but it scares them.
I don't want to open up a great big conversation near the end of the episode, but I was surprised when I was talking to my students and I was about to show them things like Grammarly and or the differences in using Google Translate versus DeepL. And I asked students, so how are you using artificial intelligence or machine translation in your other classes? I said, oh, we're not allowed to use them in our other classes, Mr. Cruz. It's a blanket ban. It's up to teachers whether or not they want to use it. But apparently at this university, most teachers said, oh, if I catch you using that stuff in here, you're going to get a whipping kind of attitude. And I don't know, that's very productive.
Well, using it to cheat is different from learning how to use it as a tool. And, in our real lives later on, in business or whatever, I've found ChatGPT to be quite useful for some things. And I think the students will too, but it's not a substitute for actually learning how to write or practicing what you need to practice for writing. And if you do that, you're cheating your parents for paying the tuition for college. So I think, and I have really pretty high level students where I'm teaching part-time, and they are eager to learn. So I'm very fortunate with the people that I'm teaching. And I think they will use it as a tool when necessary, but they're not necessarily going to, get an A that way.
I hope they cotton on to that. However, I still have difficulty with students who are still a little bit playing on their phones or a little bit sleeping in class. So if they don't feel bad about sleeping in class, I'm sure they're not going to feel bad about like using ChatGPT when it comes to like wondering, hey, am I giving my mom her money's worth in this classroom?
I saw a girl on the train, she, writing something very carefully in a notebook and looking at ChatGPT on her phone. and I was so tempted to go up to her and say, you can't do that. And then I realized, well, it's not my student. It's not my business.
Sure. And we, just looking at that particular situation, you don't really know what's going on. Is she reading that and thinking, okay, but how do I disagree with that? Or what she's doing. So yeah, you can't really jump to too many conclusions. But like you said, teaching them that process, that it's not a replacement, and if you're doing that, you're basically replacing your brain with something even at this point that's something that's even dumber.
But I think our brain is going to change anyway. We don't have to read maps anymore. We can just follow Google Maps, turn left, turn right. So I think and nobody knows how to shoe a horse anymore, but that probably was a common thing people used to know how to do. So I think we're always evolving.
This is true. On the other hand, people in the 1900s probably didn't really know how to set up a quiz on Moodle either.
Oh, they did.
So there you go. Teachers couldn't do that then either. Diane, thank you very, very much. I've always wanted to have you on the show, actually.
Thank you so much for contacting me.
No, thank you. And then you'll say thank you to me and I'll say thank you to you again. I also want to invite you, if you can make it into next week, because this conversation will go on about MT and AI with Susan, Suako, and Louise. And to everyone else who's in the room, please come and join us if you can. Otherwise, thank you all very much, everybody. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.